Line. Your motorsports, your way, every day. And now, here's your host, Jacob Seelman.
Well, actually, it's not Jacob Seelman. It's Tom Baker. Jacob Seelman is actually at Charlotte Motor Speedway doing his other job this evening, covering the first day of the World Final for the World of Outlaws and the Super Dirt Car Big Blocks for Speed Sport. So Jacob is at the track. In his stead, I will be guiding the ship this evening, and we are joined by both Cisco Scaramuza and Stephen Ovens on the program tonight, and we've got a couple of special guests that are going to be on at different times as well. Normally, if you listen to this show on a regular basis, you know that we kind of jump around a little bit, but we do a lot of conversation about NASCAR and F1 and IndyCar and all of those things, and we're going to take a little bit of a different point of view tonight. We are going to, of course, preview Texas and review the F1 race that happened at Texas, but we definitely want to talk a little bit more about the state of the sport. And so in that line, we are inviting on the show very shortly Matt Weaver from Auto Week and Short Track Scene, who is a well-known media personality and covers everything from the short tracks right up through to NASCAR. And then later on in the show, we're going to be joined by Paul Small, who, much like me, has kind of been everywhere, man. And Paul is another media personality who's done everything from announcing to writing to radio to PR work. And so we're going to try to just have a bit of a different conversation tonight and really just talk about motorsports in general and talk about where we feel the sport is right now and get some different points of view, maybe some things we'd like to see different. And you are more than welcome to join in on the discussion if you're listening to this show live, because, of course, we do have a chat on our Facebook Live. So feel free to join us on Facebook Live, Race Chaser Media Facebook page. Join us in the chat as we talk the state of the sport this evening here on Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. We are looking forward to that discussion, and we will kind of get things kicked off right after we take this time out. You're listening to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. We will be right back.
You own a performance car, and you know how to
I'm Kaz Gralla, and you're listening to Race Talk on the Performance Motorsports Network.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. As we get started with another program, we are doing something a little different tonight. We are kind of broadening our point of view and our discussion out just for a little while, and we'll kind of weave in and out of this throughout the show. We're going to talk about the state of the sport and just share our thoughts about where things are and maybe where we'd like to see them go if we could have such an opportunity to control that. We've got several folks in our chat already. We appreciate every one of you that have stopped by and jumped on our Facebook Live here. We've also got on the phone, the Race Chaser Hotline, we've got Matt Weaver from Auto Week and Short Track Scene, and Matt's been around quite a while. We love Matt's work, and happy to have Matt kind of come on and offer his 10 cents, because we know he can't stop it too. Matt, welcome to the program. We appreciate you taking some time while you're on the road tonight.
Yeah, good evening. I'm glad to be on, and certainly there's no shortage of content, storylines, and information this week.
No, definitely not. Actually, as we sit here tonight doing this show live, we've got the World Finals going on at Charlotte Motor Speedway on the dirt, which is obviously one of the bellwether dirt track races for the sprint cars and late models of the World of Outlaws and the Super Dirt Car Big Blocks. And of course, NASCAR is heading to Texas to do their thing, and all kinds of stuff going on. I guess we'll just kind of pick a place to start here, Matt. As a fan and as a journalist and as someone who's covering the sport, what is your opinion about where you think the sport is and kind of its health and its entertainment value and all of that right now?
Well, it's a tough question to really answer, because motorsports, as you know, is so diverse and
Sure
it's
is.
so wide-reaching. So to me, I think the best way to answer that is just to say outright what the biggest challenge for the entire industry is. And to me, the culture of motorsports is a thing that I think we've got to figure out what it's going to be moving forward. Because before my generation, I think the culture of motorsports was tied to the car itself. And for whatever reason, as we stand here in 2018, looking at 2019 and beyond, this next generation of Americana doesn't really care about the car maybe quite like we did growing up. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, it was about getting your license at 16 years old and being able to hit the open road. And certainly as a motorsports rider, I've gone on so many road trips, and I've done it with the same 2004 Silverado. The Americana was tied to the car, and that's not the case anymore. There are youngsters, teenagers that I know who are 17 and 18 and don't even have their driver's license. So how, as an industry, motorsports, do you sell the sport if young people no longer care about cars? And to me, the answer is technology. And I think we've got to find some way to tie them into this digital tech video game culture, cell phones that we have now. And we're seeing that with iRacing and eSport. To me, that's the future, and that's the challenge in figuring out how to sell motorsports as a whole to this tech-savvy generation. That's the thing we've got to figure out moving forward.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. And this has certainly been a point that we've talked about loads and loads on this show, most notably when we had Landon Huffman and Anthony Alfredo on, Tom, because that was a big part of what we talked about. Landon talked about his time in the NASCAR Peak Antifreeze series, and Landon talked about, and Alfredo talked about how he uses it as kind of a testing tool. So there's certainly a lot of that interconnectivity with technology that will allow young people to certainly find enjoyment in the sport. I think not only that, but also going on the last 10, 15 years or so, especially those in kind of my generation gap, certainly a big reason that we enjoy NASCAR as much as we do is from the video games that came from it before iRacing, back in the EA Sports days, back in, the NASCAR Racing 2003 season. Remember that? Stuff like that has just helped people of my generation kind of, have their way to kind of buy into the sport and have that little piece of the sport that they go out and, they play or they talk about or something like that. So I agree with that. And certainly to Matt's point where he talked about kind of this part of my generation that's walked away from, the automotive love affair that was very much the case in America for a very long time. Now we're talking about, everybody being connected, everybody on social media, everything like that, the immediacy. And I think ultimately where that lays with where NASCAR needs to go is we ultimately need to see more human elements. I think that we need to see more of the drivers out of their element, doing normal things, connecting with the fans, because we have the technology to do so, and because people want to know about these people. We talk about the heroes and villains that no longer exist in the sport. You don't have your Dale Seniors and stuff like that, who are quite characters, but we do have that. We just have to be able to show that and give that to the fans and say, no, look, these people are fascinating and they have all this going on behind the scenes, and just being able to show that to the fans, Tom, I think is a huge step that, at least in my opinion, we need to go as a sport.
I wouldn't disagree with that, Matt. I mean, I think Cisco made some very good points there.
So I think as it pertains to NASCAR, an even bigger challenge is one, the personalities are either hit or miss. So as it comes to the personalities of stock car racing, there is some guys in that discipline that their personalities leave a little bit to be desired. But when it comes to that connection and being able to leave an impression on people, I think another challenge is the competition that this sort of interconnectivity and technology provides. I think one of the larger issues as it pertains to NASCAR is how long that you have to connect to their product to be able to consume all of it. I don't think that we're in an era anymore that can afford to have 3.5 hour, 4 hour races. I think that IndyCar is seeing a bit of a surge in popularity. Globally, F1 is still the brand. And I think that if you look at little niche pockets, you see rally racing, rally cross racing specifically, which is very short, hits you very quickly. I think for stock car racing, they've got to figure out a way to condense that product, make it more action-packed, and they've got to get to the point sooner rather than later. And, as they slow these cars down and they try out this new package next year, that's going to make these races a little bit longer, too. So I think that when you start going into each meta category, it becomes more and more complicated. But the most complicating factor is more than ever before, there is so much competition for your entertainment dollar. It used to be when I was growing up, you had, 6 channels, and then as I got older, you had 30. Now you've got, 3,000 channels on TV, and that doesn't even begin to talk about Twitch, YouTube, the internet. So you've got to hit them with your product. It's got to be easy to connect to, and you've got to get in and get out and leave an impression and move on to the next one.
Well, I don't disagree with that. And Steve, you and I both grew up on short tracks, and you had a chance to start racing go-karts at a young age. I didn't until I was much older, but you and I both grew up on short tracks, and I can relate to the 3 or 4 hour race thing. I've been saying for a while, if I were in charge of NASCAR, the first thing I would do is nothing over 200 laps. I mean, you would keep your main races. I'd keep the 600 the same because that's what makes it special. I'd keep my 2.5 mile, 500, 2.5 mile track, 500 mile races the same, but I'd cut everything down to 200 laps or less. I'd love to see a 200 lap race in Bristol or Martinsville, Steve.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is a focus that, they're really looking at. And I think that not only are you looking at that from the fans' attention point of view, Tom, I think you're also looking at that from, the TV side and the TV coverage and what kind of windows you're looking at for that coverage. I think that, really, when you look at it from the NASCAR side of things, they've really done a good job.
I agree.
I think of trying to keep things on a tighter schedule. And, I think that their TV partners are really in line with that goal right now.
Well, it'll be real interesting because I think there's some possibility of seeing it head in that direction here. We'll step aside when we come back. More of Motorsports Madness, and more of this discussion right after this.
Hi, I'm Chase Cabrey, and you're listening to Race Talk on the Performance Motorsports Network. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. We are live on the Performance Motorsports Network and Spreaker, as well as on our Race Chaser Media Facebook page, and of course syndicated across the world on American Forces Network and a whole bunch of other platforms, courtesy of Sports Byline USA. And we thank them for the partnership with us. And we have on the phone Matt Weaver from Auto Week, and we have been talking about the state of the sport and kind of, I guess, the issues of technology and how do we tie that in, and then how do we, get young people interested. I want to pick up right where we left off in the last segment, Matt, because I think the idea of shortening the races on a NASCAR level, which this kind of gets to just a NASCAR problem rather than a problem for the sport, but I think now might be the time to look at that. I know that TV, wants, certain time lengths or whatever, but to me, the entertainment factor goes up when there's less time for things to happen in a race, and I think we tend to see that in the All-Star race and even some of the shorter races that we do have during the year?
Well, I think we all have the benefit of being short track guys.
Yes.
And so we have the experience, we have the perspective of seeing a lot of races that you can fit into a 1 hour, 2 hour window. I mean, the A mains for the races coming up this weekend down at Charlotte, or even last night at the KKM Give Back Classic, when it comes to wrapping that up into a TV window, that works. And for a race like last night, there was something on the line that mattered to the audience, so it was really easy to consume and to be entertained by. There are so many times that I go to a late model race. I love covering late model races just because I can get in there, tell a couple of pre-race stories, watch a race within an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then be back home. And, when I cover NASCAR, it becomes an entire day-long affair. And certainly this is not a complaint about what I do. I love what I do. But I think that if I were just a fan, having to commit my entire day to a race, that would be exhausting. Because even when I go to a New Orleans Saints football game, that's a process that takes about 6 hours.
Yep.
When I go to a Cubs game, that literally takes about 3 hours to get into Wrigley, to watch a game, and to get out. But if I were a fan just going to a NASCAR race, you're committed to being there for at least 6 to 7 hours. And I don't think that's something that we want to do either on television for those in attendance. And I think being able to better consume your consumers' time is something that should certainly be on the agenda.
That's really interesting. And I know, Steve, you're looking at the chat. You've got a comment there from our chat that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I do. Along the lines of what we're talking about here, Tom and Matt, we've got a comment here from Ricky talking about how the races, in the length of the races, how the long races right now really test the endurance of the cars. And he feels like drivers are just kind of riding around waiting for the finish to happen, where, he'd like to shorten these races up and really see what these guys have to work with and really get after it right from the drop of the green. Matt, I know that you, along with the NASCAR side, are also pretty involved in the short track scene and late models and things of that nature. My question to you, I come from the short track dirt side of things, and I think that's one thing that we on the dirt side, or I guess I will say the short track side, really has to focus on is tightening up our shows, because when we have 7-8 divisions on a weekly basis and we're taking 5-6 hours to get our Saturday night short track program in, I think that's a little bit of I think it's hurting us right now, to be honest with you.
Well, it's interesting to me you say that, because I've always thought the dirt side did a better job of managing a consumer's time than the asphalt side. I used to work in PR a lifetime ago down at Mobile International Speedway, back when Tommy Prater and Ida Fields was kind of running that show. And I think one of the biggest detriments we had is that if we were going to get fans to come in for the entire show, so you open the gates in time for qualifying at 5 o'clock, and then we were sending fans home at midnight. And certainly not everyone has to go to qualifying and be there for the entire proceedings. But I would go to a dirt track down the road at the same time. Let's just say Flomaton Speedway in Alabama.
Yep.
And I would watch a show there, and it'd be over in 4 or 5 hours. You'd hot lap, so you wouldn't have a 2 hour of endless practice. You'd hot lap, you'd qualify, and then you go straight to your features. Sometimes you'd have heats depending on the show. And I thought that dirt did a way much better job of doing that than asphalt, to the point where I've even suggested to the powers that be back then, let's tighten the show up a little bit. Now, as it pertains to NASCAR, this is a little bit more challenging, because I think that if you start saying, well, we're going to shorten the length of a cup race, but you're not going to charge me less money, there's a problem there. So you look at what they do on the open wheel side. You look at IndyCar. You go there for Sunday, race day of IndyCar. You might get an Indy Lights show. You might get a USF 2000 show. You might have sports cars,
right,
whatever. NASCAR doesn't have that. I think there's probably a way that you can shorten a cup race, for example, on a Sunday, but give them some other form of entertainment, some other form of racing content, and make better use of their time that way. If we're at one of the mile-and-a-half racetracks, do something with the infield quarter mile, the pit road quarter mile, and do that on Sunday race day. I've never understood why the NASCAR Wheel and Modified Tour race they have at Charlotte Motor Speedway that's on Thursday night. Do that on Sunday morning, right before the Cup race. Get fans in there early and give them something to watch before a shorter race on the mile-and-a-half. Don't do it on Thursday night. I think that sort of thinking could probably go a long way here in this next generation.
And Tom, certainly another place where I could see this going as well is like what Matt talked about, utilizing the Legends ovals on these mile-and-a-half racetracks, smaller tracks within the track, because these are relatively big facilities.
Right.
We're going to. Why not put out the local local Legends or Bandos divisions or something like that? Let them race.
I agree with that.
Let them be almost the pre-show in a way to the big race. Shorten the NASCAR race a little bit. As Ricky Harden points out in our comments section, he mentioned a good point about the fact of the equipment's so good nowadays, you don't need the races to be 500 miles,
right?
Because you're not testing the endurance. Like, the equipment's not going to break 9 times out of 10.
Well,
We're not testing that anymore.
That's been my point, Matt, is we've made the cars so good, and even the motors. I mean, compared to what you saw even 10 years ago, you don't see nearly the blown motors, and we rarely even spin these cars out anymore unless a tire goes down or something else happens. The cars are very good, and I think more of the emphasis should be put back on the drivers rather than just on the endurance factor.
Yeah, the cars are too reliable. The drivers are too physically fit, and when you put those things together, this is no longer an endurance race anymore. And I'm not sure that we can ever get back to that point. I know NASCAR is looking at the engine regulations for future engines, but I'm just not sure we will ever get back to that point. So if you can't make this part of the man versus machine kind of narrative, you got to make this, man versus man or woman, racer versus racer, and just get to the point. There have been so many mile-and-a-half races. Look, I don't hate mile-and-a-half races. I just think that sometimes we take too long to get to the point of some of these mile-and-a-half races.
Yes.
That race at Vegas would have been perfect if it had been 100 laps, 100 miles, or an hour shorter. And the ending to that race, with everything that was at stake with the playoffs, if we just didn't take so dang long to get to the finish, it would have been a completely different story.
Yeah, I agree totally, and I love the idea of a companion race. And Steve, you just had a funny one in the chat here about what we could do at Indianapolis on the Sunday of the Brickyard.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, here's my ideal situation, and this is where I get to inject my my feelings as a dirt fan. They just built this dirt track in the infield at Indianapolis. Let's have a dirt midget race at noon and then run the Brickyard 400. I mean, talk about a double dip. I mean, what a way to lead into the Brickyard.
Yeah, I think that might be a little complicated just because there was a bit of a dirt buildup on the oval track, and that kind of created a complication there, because people actually talked about that during the Brickyard weekend. There were some folks who said, look, during the Indy 500, we've got the concert going on in the snake pit as the race is taking place. And you can have people who buy a ticket to go to the concert. They can buy a ticket to see the race. They can go back and forth. Either way, the track is getting your money, and it makes the event more viable. So why not do that with a midget race or a kart race or whatever the hot ticket would be? The problem with the dirt track there is it just creates a bit of a mess for the big track as well. But I like that sort of outside-the-box thinking, though. I mean, David Reagan and I had this conversation. It might have been a year and a half ago now. But we were talking about that Atlanta Legends track, and he's like, let's get the late models out there, because he ran a late model race there back in 2011. It was the last time they actually ran late models on the Atlanta Motor Speedway Legends track.
Right.
Chase Elliott was a part of that. Chris Dilbeck from PFC. I think he might have even won that race. He's like, that'd be a great show to add to the weekend.
Yeah.
Have either Cars Tour or Southern Super Series sanction it and get some of the up-and-coming stars, some of the veterans up in front of a new audience. And maybe they, during an autograph session, really enjoy following one of these short track drivers.
Oh, I
that
agree.
way you can kind of build a bridge between two different disciplines. And this is one other point I want to make on the show before my time is up.
Matt, if we can get you to hang on just 1 second, we'll bring you back on the other side of the break here and let you finish that point. You're listening to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Be right back.
Okay, so
I'm Noah Gregson, and you're listening to Motorsports Madness on PMN, the Performance Motorsports Network.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Tom Baker, Jacob Seelman, not Jacob Seelman. Jacob's off tonight. I'm so used to saying his name. Tom Baker, Stephen Evans, Cisco Scaramuza, and Randy Miller, all inside the Racing USA studios. On the phone with us is Matt Weaver from Auto Week. And Matt, before we let you go, because I know you've got to get out of here, we want to give you a chance to finish making the point that you started previous to our break.
Yeah, and I appreciate the chance to do so, too. I think the main thing to me, though, when I think about overall state of the sport type topics, we, and I say this collectively, as the motorsports industry, we need to be far less territorial than we've ever been before. We need to realize that we're one motorsports community. Back in the day, you used to be able to afford to either be a dirt guy, a pavement guy, open wheel guy, NASCAR, F1, whatever. We don't have that luxury anymore because of all the reasons we talked about before. For whatever reason that you want to choose why the sport isn't as popular anymore. But I think this sort of outside-the-box thinking, whether it's the Brickyard 400 having a midget race before the stock car weekend, having late models on a quarter mile before a cup race. IndyCar has came out this weekend and talked about their willingness to try to work with NASCAR and co-promote Xfinity Cup races with IndyCar. And certainly they've been doing that forever with the Truck Series. anytime that you can share your product with a fan of a different discipline, that's going to be huge to growing this thing, because I just don't think that we have the benefit nowadays to either be I'm this kind of race fan or this kind of race fan. We all have to be in this together in one way or form. And I think whether it's the way that we cover races, what we do, the sanctioning body and how they promote races, we have to make people realize that we're all racing fans. And I just don't think that we can pit them against each other like we could have 10, 15 years ago.
Well, I agree with that. And Matt, with that, we appreciate you dropping by. I know that you're time sensitive here, so we look forward to having you back on again. I hope soon in the future here to talk some more racing with you. We love your stuff at Auto Week and with Short Track Scene, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the time today, guys, and we'll catch up later.
That's Matt Weaver. And Cisco, I want to let you go ahead and pick up on that point, because I know you've got a response here.
Yeah, and kind of, going off, Ricky Harden and I are kind of going back and forth in chat a little bit, kind of throwing around ideas. And it was one of the points I wanted to get to earlier that Matt brought up about some of these more niche parts of the racing community becoming more popular. I mean, he mentioned Rallycross, which is, I think, a very good example, especially when you look at FIA World Rallycross. Let's just kind of sweep the whole GRC thing that happened kind of under the rug. Let's just pretend like that didn't happen.
In-house.
But certainly FIA World Rallycross's just explosion in popularity in Europe has been fantastic to watch. And now how that's going to transition to ARX is going to be interesting. But another discipline that I think, Tom, that warrants more coverage and really I think is hard for a lot of traditional motorsports fans to go, oh, yeah, no, I want to watch that, is drifting. Yeah. Because drifting especially has grown so much in popularity throughout the 90s, throughout programs like Initial D, and obviously you think of Fast and Furious, but also kind of that whole import tuner, transition into the mainstream for a very long time that happened. That kind of took over car culture. That was one of their exports basically at that point. And I think it was hard for a lot of traditional motorsports fans to look at that and kind of see the same sort of, correlation in racing and stuff like that, because of how differently that is treated as a motorsports, how it's scored, how you actually win a drifting event, and by extension Gymkhana as well, which of course that came around due to the popularity of the internet. Ken Block, his Gymkhana videos on YouTube. So certainly all these kind of small motorsports niches, I think, are all the bigger part of the proverbial motorsports pie that we just kind of have to all continue to support and kind of, put down the egos a little bit, as Ricky said in chat, and just kind of work together.
Well, I don't disagree with you. And Steve, I think, it's a good point that Cisco makes. And I think to Matt's point and Cisco's point, I think the more we can expose different people from different parts of the motorsports world to other parts of motorsports, the more that people realize, well, okay, there's actually some cool factor here. I mean, I know that I'm personally a huge fan of some of the more niche types of racing, whether it's rally cars or whether it's, the Australian supercars type racing, tour car type racing like that. I love watching that. I think it's cool to see different things at different times. And I think to introduce and sort of cross-promote in live event form, to me, is a good marketing value as well for potential sponsors to cross over from one division to another.
And I can share this with you, Tom, as a public relations and PA announcer at a local dirt track up here in my area. One of our main focuses for the off season here between 2018 and 2019, we're located very, very close to both Pocono Raceway and Watkins Glen International.
That's true.
Yet at the same time, Tom, we don't really do a lot of cross promotion, even though they are so close to where we're located. And I think that, we've been able to make contacts with those folks over the last couple of years. But again, we just really haven't cashed in on that kind of opportunity to work together and promote each other, because I think there's just as many NASCAR fans at dirt tracks as there are dirt track fans at NASCAR events. The question is, are we going to be willing to, take our niche customers or fans and try and cross promote? And I think that's the question. And not just on the NASCAR big cup track level, Cisco. I think this expands to even in our area too. We have a local pavement track. Chemung Speedrome, Oswego Speedway, different different fan bases like that. Trying to cross promote each other.
And I think that comes back to the point that we made earlier, Tom, about the interconnectivity, but also the video game aspect. Because if you look at something like iRacing, that has formula cars. Basically, every open wheel car you can get right now outside of maybe super modifieds and, some of the drag racing stuff. But that is dirt racing. It has oval racing, road racing, and stuff like that. And combine that with, the Forzas and Gran Turismos of the world that kind of connect, that sort of stuff to regular car culture and sort of the amateur events that we see with Rallycross. And, they also have Formula Drift and regular and like what GRC was, that kind of professional Rallycross as well. I think the media world, like at least as far as the video games are concerned, they're already kind of going that step, Tom, and I think it just has to transition more so into the mainstream to where, if I went to Gateway for the IndyCar race there, why not have a Formula Drift or an amateur drift event in the little bit of the road course there, or like Steve mentioned, have a midget race at the dirt track at Indianapolis that's there now, or if we're gonna go to Pocono, maybe do some like amateur drag racing on the front stretch, or even something like that. Something to not only, combine the different facets of the racing world, but also maybe give people an opportunity that if there are amateur racers, and it's something that I love about drag racing, let amateur racers be a part of the action, because they'll bring their family, their friends to go out and see it. And it's not just these big stars that, maybe, as Matt said, don't have the personalities that make this as marketable as it could be. If your friend's going out there to race, yeah, sure, I'll go out there and watch the NASCAR race too. Why not?
Well, I was just sitting here thinking about if you're going to do a drifting event, and you go to the right kind of NASCAR track, for example, with that, why couldn't we get one or two of the NASCAR guys to test their prowess at drifting? I mean,
exactly.
Think about this. I mean, who wouldn't be entertained by watching Kyle Larson or Joey Logano or Bubba Wallace or Blaney or whomever it might be trying to figure out how to drift? I mean, to me, that would be entertaining. And I think, but you don't even see like demolition derbies or anything in a lot of these NASCAR races anymore. And I think that's something that's kind of missing as well. And I know demo derbies can be tough on a race day because you got to make sure the track's clean. But Cisco, I just think, we're missing the boat here by not utilizing more of the day for entertainment. Concerts are easy, but it shouldn't be a different concert at a concert shouldn't be the deal at every track to me, because it gets stale. I think the idea of, other types of racing, a demo derby, a car show, something like that, I think is cool.
And, I love to bring up Indianapolis Speedrome because they're very good at that, because it's this little kind of very small oval, but it's a figure eight track. So they have figure eight racing. They can do oval racing there. They have drifting events that you can go out as a member of the community, sign the waiver. You could take the family minivan out there if you wanted to do that or something like that. But they could just as easily have a professional drifting event out there. They could have Gymkhana, and they also have the room that if they wanted to put some dirt down and do a dirt race there, they could do that. They do demolition derby. So all of these different events take place at this one racetrack. And when I talked to Jonathan Bird, it was about a year and a half ago or so, I did a story about him on Race Chaser Media. Just his whole thing when they went to revamp that track was trying to get the fans the most entertainment they can, and not just having the same thing. Yes, running divisions is a huge part of motorsport, but let's mix it up. I mean, at the end of the day, having one division that races at a racetrack, or several, or having the weekly schedule just be the weekly schedule, that's never really cut it. I mean, beforehand we had giveaways, we had theme nights. Why not change it up even more so we have different events during the year instead of just, wear pink one night, or, half off hot dogs another night?
That's half off hot dogs. You can't go wrong with that.
I was going to say you can have that any night.
I mean, yeah, let's not get rid of that
Right.
either. But I'm just saying we can expand even more so.
If you had it in Martinsville, I'd buy twice as many.
That's right. Back when I was back home in Texas, I had season tickets to TMS, and TMS did a garage party every year where season ticket holders could go actually into the garage area. They had cleaned out like the Xfinity garage from the night before and had like Ferris wheels, and because it was like No Limits Texas, so they had like basically like a carnival where they had like the cage dome with the motorcycles in it and midget wrestling and like all kinds of stuff that you could do whenever you were a season ticket holder. Which was really cool because you could go there for a couple hours and then go find your seat and get ready for the race. And that was cool. That was awesome.
I like that because, Cisco, I think that, again, the variety and the more you can tie it to things that the younger demographic enjoys, the better.
And I just want to bring up one more kind of small thing that we talked about, just because it's been going on recently and kind of the final photos just came out, but Hot Wheels just did their 50th anniversary tour around the country.
Wow.
And one of the attractions of that was you were able to take a picture of your car next to a giant Hot Wheels kind of, one of those cardboard things. So it looked like your car was in a Hot Wheels container or something like that. And they had a whole contest. But even stuff like that, concourse events or car shows. There was a car show at the Rodney Cook Memorial just down the road at the local community church there. They had that during what would have been the race day. So, just events like that are around the area aren't too far away, that if people who flew in or, came from a far enough distance are still able to go to that and then, go see a NASCAR race because, that's the big event at the end of the day. But why not throw all these things out there and say, hey, take a look at this. Texas has been doing it. Talladega's been doing it, though not really on the books necessarily. Right. It's more a case of you go there and you see things that no human has ever seen in their life. But nonetheless, another case of that where it's just people going out there to see more than just the Cup race.
Agreed. Yeah, all good discussion here. We're going to pick it up here shortly as well, and we've got Texas to talk about, all kinds of stuff. Back with more Race Chasers Motorsports Madness right after this.
When do you think of a plumber? Like most people, even if it's an emergency, you can be confident about who will arrive to help.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness as we continue with the program. And I got a question for all of you. Is your job sucking the life out of you? Do you really wish you could do something else? I've got an idea. How about information technology? Okay, I know what you're thinking, but I'm not a math and science person. Well, no problem, and no excuses, because it isn't rocket science. If it's my computer career, helping people start an IT career is my computer career's thing. If you don't absolutely love what you do, just go to mycomputercareer.edu and take the free career evaluation today. You could start your new life as an information technology professional in as little as 4 months. Attend classes on campus, they have 7 across the country, or live online just 2 or 3 times a week to get what you'll need to start your new career. More than just a school, My Computer Career helps you to get into the industry by working with hundreds of employers that hire their students. My Computer Career is nationally accredited, and financial aid is available for those who qualify, including the GI Bill. Classes start soon, so go take the career evaluation now at mycomputercareer.edu. That's mycomputercareer.edu, mycomputercareer.edu, and we now talk to you about what's going on in the world of motorsports. We've got about, a minute and a half or so, about a minute to get a quick note in here. The World Finals going on at Charlotte Motor Speedway. As we do this show on the dirt track at Charlotte, if you haven't got tickets and want to show up, you can still get them, but do it quick. There aren't many left, and this event often sells out by Friday. So go to charlottemotorspeedway.com. Get your tickets now and get here for the World Finals tomorrow. 3 big divisions in action, and we are really, really excited about being a part of that, as we always are. Jacob Seelman is at the track already, keeping you up to date on what's going on through his sources at Speed Sport. And, of course, we are going to continue with Race Chasers Motorsports Madness right after these words. Be right back.
I'm an HRA Pro Stock Racer, Tanner Gray, and you're listening to the Performance Motorsports Network, the voice of motorsports.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness, and we continue with race conversation here. We've been talking about the state of the sport. We've had some great discussion about that. We're going to pick that up in our next segment when we welcome Paul Small to the program. But Steve-O, real quick, Team Dryden with a big announcement here. Dryden, of course, has sponsored the ARCA car owned by Ken Schrader and driven by Will Rogers this year. And they also made their debut on one of the Shark Racing cars in the World of Outlaws Sprint Car Series. Now, they just announced that they are going to sponsor both Shark Racing cars for 2019. Welcome to the big time in the World of Outlaws Shark Racing.
Absolutely. Not only that, Tom, they're also being a major sponsor on the World of Outlaw Craftsman Sprint Car Series as well. I believe the press release put it perfectly, Tom, when they said Dryden is going. And this is huge. Not only, I mean, this is a very big deal for the World of Outlaws, but this is a much, much bigger deal for Shark Racing. And as I put it to Jacob earlier on his way to the racetrack, I said, Jacob, I think that this is that moment for Shark Racing where it's, okay, guys, we've made it. I mean, as though winning races on the World of Outlaws Tour wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Now they get a major sponsor to sign on with both of their teams. And it's not just we're buddies with these guys back at our hometown in PA. This is a sponsor that they cultivated this year. They worked with on Logan's 1S this year and impressed them. And they liked what they got out of that. And now it's a 2-year deal. This is a massive deal for these guys.
Yeah, it is.
And Tom, just think about how far that team has come from the first time we talked about them on this program to where they are now. We weren't sure they would make it through that first season, and now here they are getting ready for 2019 with a full-time sponsor for the next 2 seasons. It's incredible.
Exactly. And just for proper categorization, Dryden Performance Products is now the official motor oil and official diesel exhaust fuel of the World of Outlaws Sprint Car and Late Model Series. So, yeah, big step up for the Dryden brand to sponsor the 2 cars and become affiliated with the series. Looking forward to seeing what happens in 2019 with that team. I think a lot of wins maybe coming. We'll be back with more after this.
You own a performance car and
Hi, I'm Matt Tift, and you're listening to Race Talk on the Performance Motorsports Network.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Tom Baker, joined by Stephen Evans and Cisco Scaramouza, and of course in the tech shed over there behind the glass, our producer Randy Miller, who also chimes in when he'd like to. And we are now joined by one of my mentors from a while back up in New York. Paul Small is a gentleman who has done a lot in the sport from behind the scenes, kind of much like I have. Our careers have followed somewhat similar paths. And Paul was one of the announcers at the time who kind of helped to teach me the ropes many years ago. Happy to have him back with us on the radio as we get back into the discussion about the state of the sport, Paul. And we spent most of the first hour on that topic, and a lot of different points were brought up, from how to tie into the younger demographic to potentially shortening the races, doing different things on race days at different tracks. Where do you kind of weigh in on your feelings about the state of the sport as it is as a whole right now, Paul, and what thoughts do you have about that?
Well, first off, thanks for having me back. It's been a while.
It has been.
Hopefully you've forgotten everything that you've learned from me, so you don't have to.
Mama, come get me. I am done. That is the one thing I retain and still use it.
There you go. There you go. You know, I've been thinking about this since we touched base earlier today. I think we are and continue to be in two places. We're at a crossroads and we're at a point of stasis at the same time. And there are good points and bad points to both of those. And that may sound like a complete contradiction in terms to say, well, we're at a junction in the road, but we're sitting still. That's exactly what I'm saying, is we're at a junction in the road and we're sitting still in most cases.
Well, you know, that's kind of an interesting thought to put out there. What would you like to see different? What do you think we need to change or to tweak or to do differently going forward?
Well, I don't think it matters whether you're going to watch go-karts, micro sprints, stock cars, modified sprint cars, late models, NASCAR, Formula One, drag racing. I don't care what kind of racing it is. There is one common thread amongst all of them that will sell tickets as long as the day is, and it can be summed up in one word, and that word is action. And if anything that I've noticed, especially in the past 3 or 4 years, action from the top all the way down to the bottom is something that we are sorely lacking.
You know, I see that more on pavement, Paul, than I do on dirt. Would you agree with that? I think the dirt tracks basically, for the most part, are still pretty much what they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we can get into a whole other discussion about track safety or whatever, because there's a whole other. But I think, honestly, I see that being an issue more on the pavement side of things in some of the divisions than I do on the dirt. But I do agree with you. I think the side-by-side competition, the passing, you know, we talked in the first hour about how, you know, the cars, especially like in NASCAR, are so good that it's just really hard to spin them out. You don't see spin outs. You don't see cars breaking down as much. You don't even see as much, you know, as many motors blowing. You know, what is, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take a look at the top tier levels of motorsport. On a global scale, that would be Formula One, and for North America, that would be NASCAR and IndyCar. What is the one common thread amongst these three things that are not what they used to be? Well, the answer is action. Why is that? I don't think it's because the cars are too good. I think it's because the cars are bad, especially in the case of NASCAR. I think the minute we went to the car of tomorrow is when NASCAR jumped the shark. They came up with essentially an undrivable race car. I am sick and tired of seeing NASCAR, Monster Energy Cup cars, and Xfinity cars crab walking down straightaways because that's the only way they can get these things to turn at the end of a straightaway. It doesn't look natural. It looks wonky. There's entirely too much single file, not enough side by side. Yes, I agree with the concept of shortening the races, but there are other things in these top tiers of motorsports that are starting to trickle down into other forms of racing that I am not happy about, which I can sum up again in one word: gimmicks. And here's what I classify as gimmicks.
Okay.
Push to pass in IndyCar, gimmick. DRS in Formula One, gimmick. The entire playoff chase in NASCAR, gimmick.
Oh.
Lucky Dog, gimmick. I could go on and on. My personal pet peeve and the biggest sin of all is the competition caution that's used almost universally in short course off-road. It is used in stadium super trucks. Oh, and another thing, Joker lanes. That's in Rallycross. That shows up at the $1 million Supercross event at Sam Boyd Stadium that the Supercross Series does. If you have to resort to gimmicks to try to artificially stimulate your product, there's a lot more wrong with your product that you're not paying attention to.
That's an interesting point of view. I couldn't disagree with you more about some of that, and one of them is the playoffs. I think the playoff system is great for NASCAR. I think it has added a tremendous amount of interest in the last 10 races that even going back to when I was younger, all the way through, it's just another race. And when you get a situation where you have one or two guys that are, running away with the title or whatever, I think the playoff system has been great for NASCAR. I also think that it forces stops. If we had, more cautions during a race and have more action during the race, I could see where you may not need the playoffs. But honestly, for me, and Cisco, I'll give you a chance to jump in here, I completely disagree with the playoffs system. I love it, and I wouldn't want to go back to it. What do you think about that?
I a little bit surprised, to be honest, because some of the things, Paul, that you talked about are things that I think have made the sports way more enjoyable over the past 10 years. Something, for example, like the Joker lap in Rallycross is just the one thing that kind of befuddled me, because for me, that makes a huge difference in the racing you're watching, because it forces the drivers to not only have a strategy on the racetrack, but it also keeps the groups together, and it also gives somebody who's in the back a chance to kind of run their own race and get themselves back up to the front and create a better product in the overall race than just someone driving away. Because that's kind of a problem in Rallycross, is that you do have those cases where, I think back to Sebastian Loeb at the X Games a couple of years ago, who just decimated absolutely everyone in the Rallycross race. And it was like, we were all sitting here like, that wasn't even a race. That was just a slaughter, basically. But stuff like that, I purposely, if it makes the racing more exciting and more entertaining, I'm all for it. So I guess, I kind of have to disagree, Paul. I think some of the things we brought in do work really well.
Well, and I'm going to give Paul a chance to respond to that, but we're coming up on a break here, so I want to make sure that we get out on time. But I think one thing I see that we all can probably agree on is that the competition itself, the side-by-side passing and all of that, I know we've had some good racing in NASCAR over the last month or so, and I would agree honestly with the idea that this year as a whole has been better just in NASCAR than maybe in years past. But I agree with Paul on the gimmicks to a point. I just think there are some that make sense and have turned out to be good, and others maybe not so much, and it's good to be able to disagree on some of that, because that's what makes us all different. And I think trying different things actually is a part of, seeing what the fans respond positively to. So interesting stuff, and we're going to continue on this line when we come back. I want to give Paul a chance to respond as we continue with Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Don't go away. We're just getting started with our second hour here and looking forward to more. We'll be back with more of Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness right after these words. Don't go anywhere.
Parents,
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness as we rock along to some Jim Croce there. Tom Baker along with Cisco Scaramuzza and Steve Ovens. And, of course, our special guest is Paul Small. And we are talking about the state of the sport. Randy Miller over there in the tech shed is punching the buttons and giving us some great music tonight. And we are going to give Paul a chance to respond to what Cisco said before the break. And I will kind of lead you into this, Paul, by saying I think we all kind of agree that some gimmicks probably are bad, but I think the idea of trying something different is good. I mean, I think, would you not agree that we do need to make some changes in terms of trying to find some way to better connect to the younger demographic, especially in light of the fact that, as Matt Weaver pointed out in our first segment of the show, a lot of the youth just they aren't gearheads the way that a lot of us used to be when we were growing up.
Right. Well, let me give you my take on why gimmicks are bad. I consider a bad gimmick to be something that is an attempt to artificially stimulate something that has a bigger problem. Now, case in point, if I were to sit a novice person who maybe has never watched an IndyCar race down to watch an IndyCar race, and let's say we're watching Toronto, the street circuit of Toronto, and they're hearing the commentators talk about push to pass and, oh, he's on the button and all this other stuff, the novice person is probably going to look at me and go, you mean to tell me that unless they press the magic button, they can't pass another car? Well, what's my answer? I don't have an answer for them because they're absolutely right.
Well, I don't disagree with the push to pass. I've always thought that was an example of something that we didn't need because
right. And in the case of competition cautions, and this is what really bugs me about short course off-road, which I think short course off-road and rallycross are on the cusp of becoming very big and could be the wave of the future for our sport. But here is what's holding them back. A competition caution to me is a way of saying that, well, either because of the construction of the track, the construction of the vehicles, or whatever other contributing factors, we have a 16-lap race, and they're strung out by lap number 6. So at the halfway point, we need to artificially stimulate this race by throwing a caution flag and bunching everybody up so we can have another restart and have a chance for somebody to pass somebody. Wrong. Totally wrong answer. You need to go back to square one and back to the drawing board. That's not how you fix the problem. It's a Band-Aid on a dam break.
Well, and see, that I think, at least I'll speak for myself only, but I agree with you, honestly, about both of those things. I mean, I think, those types of things, to me, I don't call them gimmicks. I just call them, well, the competition caution may be a gimmick, but I just think they're silly. Now, the playoff system is a whole different thing to me, and I can explain why here in a bit, but I want to get to Steve, because you've got an interesting question involving somebody that we all know well, Glenn Donnelly, Steve, so I'm going to let you fire that off.
Well, I wanted to bring this up tonight with Paul on the show because I know, Paul in his early days working with Dirt Motorsports and Rush Hour on Dirt, and anybody that's not familiar with Paul's work, I highly encourage you to check that out on YouTube. I mean, yes. Paul was one member of a great broadcast team back in the day. But the reason I bring that up, Paul, is because I feel like on the national level, there's a lot of things that promoters on the national level could learn from guys more on the short track scene. You obviously got to see a lot of the promotional things that Glenn Donnelly did here in our area in Central New York. So I'm just wondering if there's things that you saw Glenn do over the years that maybe could help these national level series benefit from. Is there something that, or even something you see currently that something on the national level could take and kind of run with?
Well, I was hoping somebody was going to bring up the television aspect of things, Stephen, and thank you very much for that, because that leads into one of the things that I wanted to talk about with the state of the sport. You're absolutely correct. We had a wonderful team of people that worked on Rush Hour on Dirt in the 90s. They were people that understood racing, but they also understood how to tell a story and how to tell that story with emotion and relatability. And this is the same lesson that I teach as a radio programmer to air talent is you've got to be relatable. Well, what's more relatable than the battle of good versus evil? And in the late 90s, in the heyday of Rush Hour, we had that. We had Danny Johnson as the good guy, and we had the corporate jet, Brett Hearn, as the bad guy. And I remember actually reading it, and I think it was in one of Dick Berggren's magazines, where Brett Hearn asked Glenn's son Patrick, who was one of the behind the scenes producers for Rush Hour, why do I have to be the bad guy? And Pat said, well, because it sells. Well, what sells about a lot of racing that's on TV today? Not much. There's a lot more racing available. The beauty of it is that now, thanks to the internet, thanks to live internet pay-per-views, live streaming, and networks like MAP TV, there is now much more of an outlet for all different types of short track racing and other forms of motorsport to be out and about. And that is an absolutely wonderful thing. Don't get me wrong. The more that we can get our product in its various iterations out to the public for consumption, the better it's going to be for us. But caveat to that statement, if you are going to do this, you need to do more than just document an event. You need to get the viewer emotionally invested in what is going on. How do you do that? You tell a story.
Agreed.
You tell the story of a driver. You tell the story of their upbringing. You find something about that driver that a fan can relate to. Because what's the greatest thing about going to a short track race on a Saturday night? When the guy that you're cheering for beats the guy that you don't like.
I agree.
That's the big thing. We don't do enough selling of that on any level of motorsports. And I'm sorry, but, Martin Truex and Joey Logano having a little tete-a-tete over who raced who clean, race how you want to be raced, at Martinsville last week, that's not a feud. Bobby Allison and Richard Petty in the early 70s, that was a feud.
Yeah.
That had people invested. That's the kind of level of intensity that you need to get. By the time we get to this weekend's race, and quite honestly, this will show you how cavalier I am about NASCAR nowadays. I don't even know where the heck this weekend's race is, and I don't particularly care either. But the TV will try to tell a little bit of a story, but you know what? It's just going to fizzle out. There's not going to be a sequel. There's not going to be a chapter 2. We don't care anymore. By the end of the race, we'll be on to the next thing because our attention spans are the size of a gnat's wingspan.
Well, see, I don't know if I totally agree with the attention span part of it. I think but I do agree that I don't think you can compare, a feud of today like Joey and Martin to, something out of the 70s, because those were longer lasting. It was, and there were times when drivers back then really didn't like each other. You get that now and again today, like with Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski. Those two just don't like each other. So when they're around each other on the racetrack, you are watching. But Paul, I honestly, I have to say that I feel like racing as a sport. Now, if you want to talk just about NASCAR and, what do you like, what don't you like, or whatever, I think racing as a sport, in most ways, is still just as good as it was. I do think that, and I think that the short tracks are actually seeing a bit of a resurgence from, the fact that NASCAR has suffered a bit from fans. I think they're going to the short tracks. They're discovering local and regional racing again, which is, I think, great for that level of the sport. We need that. But when you talk about television, I agree with that. When you and we haven't talked about cost, and the cost of competition at any level is much higher. Some of that's just the world today, but some of it's unnecessary. And I think for the most part, when you look at the television aspect, I think TV tends to not really understand like it used to about stories, because I think we're so caught up, trying to, you hear the announcers now talk about, and they try to tell you everything they know about something instead of just trying to focus on a character. And I do agree that characters are what sold this sport even in 1979. What was it that we were all attracted to about that Daytona 500? It was something that happened at the end of the race and had nothing to do with on track. It happened in turn 1, and it was a fight.
Well, actually, I think it happened in turn 3, but that's
3. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
It started in turn 1.
Yeah.
It finished in turn 3 in the infield. But what precipitated that? The action on the racetrack is what precipitated the fight.
Right.
That's what led to it. That was the catalyst of it, which leads me to a sidebar point here. Now we're talking about characters. We're talking about feuds. Okay, I am going to go on record to say that I never watched a single episode of Madhouse. You know why?
Me neither.
Because to me that was the complete antithesis of the way to sell our sport.
Yep, I agree.
I hear for every 5 people that say they go to Bowman Gray, 3 out of those 5 people are going because they want to see the fight. They want to see a fight like the one they saw on Madhouse. That's just basically exploitation. That is reality TV that we all know is anything but real, especially if you've been on the other side of the camera, as I have, to see how some of these reality shows are really put together.
Yeah, I agree, Paul, and also taking note that it's back now. We've got, I think it's the Discovery Channel. It's back. For those who want to watch roller derby on wheels, it's back. You can have it. More with Paul Small, and we continue here on Motorsports Madness right after these words.
How to be a great dad in
Motorsports Network, the voice of motorsports.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Tom Baker, Steve Ovens, Cisco Scaramuza, Paul Small, and over in the tech shed over there is Randy Miller, our producer / co-host as well. And we've been talking with Paul about the state of the sport, and we basically are trying to keep this sort of generalized. So I'm going to go around the table, and I'll start with Paul because he's our guest. And Here's what I want to know, Paul. If you could be some sort of king of the sport, and not just NASCAR, but all of motorsports, if you could be the king of all of motorsports, what one thing would you like to most see different in the sport across the board? Give me one thing you would like to see different in the sport across the board.
Competition without enforced parity.
Okay, explain.
Meaning that, I look at it this way. Let me use Formula One as an example. Every so often, Formula One, I think it's about every 4 or 5 years, they overhaul the technical specifications.
Yep.
And usually those technical specifications are designed to create more overtaking or to lower costs, something we haven't really gotten into yet. Well, here's the thing. You can say, okay, we're going to put this wicker bill on a wing and it's going to slow the cars down 15 miles an hour. What's going to happen? Well, the high-funded teams are simply going to throw $10 million at their R&D department, and by the time pen hits paper and the rule becomes official, the cars are now 20 miles an hour faster than they were when they were supposed to be 10 miles an hour slower. You can't legislate money out of racing. Now, having said that, the spec engine and some of the spec classes that are out and about nowadays have really been a shot in the arm for motorsports in general. It's brought a ton of people back into the fold who couldn't afford to race anymore. And some of these spec classes, the racing is phenomenal. But you have to have a balance. There has to be a place where those who want to innovate and spend money can innovate and spend the money. And I think too often in this business now, we are so concerned with coming up with yet another quote-unquote entry-level spec class where the cars all look the same, the cars all have the same components, and everything's supposed to be parity so we can have better competition, and it backfires horribly. We need to have a balance between those that want to spend the money and innovate and come up with the kind of creations that we used to see like at Indianapolis in the 1960s when somebody showed up with a rear engine car. Everybody's heads went into a spin. When Andy Granatelli showed up with a turbine-powered race car, they went into a bigger spin. When Mickey Thompson showed up with a car with 2 engines in it, people's heads went into a spin. But that was fun. That was innovative. That was exciting. That was compelling. Seeing the same looking stuff going around with people playing follow the leader because the cars are so equal that nobody can pass anybody. That's not racing. That's watching a freight train go by. We have plenty enough of that. We don't need any more of it.
Well, I think there's a balance in that as well because, and Cisco, I'll come to you next. I think there's a balance in that as well because, for example, the super modifieds in Oswego, we allowed the aero car to take hold. Now everybody's got an aero car. It's way too expensive. You don't have a full field, and now they're bringing a 350 class in, which basically serves as a way for those who can't afford the aero car to still have a super modified to race. I do think sometimes, I agree with Paul about innovation, but I think it has to be kept somewhat in check by a wallet because you don't want to get to a point where you only have 5 or 6 big teams. F1 has suffered from that for years, Cisco.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely something that the sports have to have a good balance of both sides of it. But
how you get to that?
If I were the, czar of racing for a day, Tom.
Yep.
I would give everybody the next week off, everybody in the motorsports world, and I would give them that week off with one caveat. You have to sit down and watch bits of programming or go to races somehow. I don't know how it would work, but either way, force everybody in the motorsports world to go look at every other motorsport and go see what they can learn from that. So F1 guys have to go look at NASCAR. NASCAR has to go look at IndyCar. IndyCar has to go look at drag racing. Drag racing has to go look at drifting. Drifting has to go look at supercars. Supercars have to go look at Gymkhana. Gymkhana has to look at touring cars, and so on and so forth.
Drag racing has to go look at drifting. Steve Evans, can you picture John Force trying to drift his car at 300 miles an hour down the course?
I'm not sure that I can, but I think if I were to wear the Czar's clothing for a day, I think that I would have to put something in place where the upper echelons of your national series do more outreach to your local short tracks. I think that there are so many great examples, and I speak from experience here in this area. There are so many ways that the drivers, the teams from the upper levels of motorsports in our country anyway, how big of an impact they can have by outreaching to their local short tracks, when they're in the area, or, whatever that may be. I think there needs to be, we talked about cross-promoting earlier. I think that there could be a lot more outreach and a lot more cross-promotion than we have today. And again, when these eyeballs are on their favorite form of motorsports and now all of a sudden they're on a different form, we can only get better. We can only grow from that.
Yeah, I agree. Randy?
Well, everybody's you're pretty much on point with, ideas and thoughts. Coming from somebody who not only has been a part of the dirt world for my entire life, but raced on it as well, I think the overall cost of motorsports all the way across the board is way too expensive for anybody to be able to compete. Unless you have a pocket full of money right out of the gate, you're not going to be competitive. I remember when I was racing, I had probably one of the 3 best cars, but I had sponsorship to pay for it. But
right.
I still wasn't competitive because there were still people out there spending way more money than I was spending on my car and still being way more competitive than me. But I think part of the cost of the sport is what's keeping younger kids from wanting to get involved in the sport, because they would much rather spend, their parents would much rather spend the money on them to, go to soccer practice or football practice or baseball practice rather than buying them a race car and having to shell out all the money to get them to be competitive. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you think about entry cost and registration fees and pit passes and all that stuff. That stuff goes up, which means the general admission tickets have to go up, and then the concessions have to go up. And now a family of 4 won't be able to take their kids to, enjoy a dirt race for less than $150, $200, and that's way too expensive for a family of 4 to have a family night out.
Well, see, and I agree with a little bit of everything all of you have said, but I think in the end, for me, the first thing I would do is tell everybody in the entire sport to just calm down. Because I don't think the sport, there's sort of this underlying tone out there that the sport's falling apart and it's going away and it's going to be gone in a while. And, I don't agree with any of that. I mean, I spend a lot of time around NASCAR. Yeah, NASCAR's got work to do. And, Paul, I would love nothing better than to see every bit of aero taken right out of the cars. And every engineer on every team, no offense to my engineer friends out there, but you need to go find a job somewhere else because we're not letting you work in NASCAR anymore because it's not supposed to be an innovation engineering sport. But it's probably not realistic.
We've always considered Formula One to be the pinnacle of automotive engineering, the most technically advanced race cars with the all the bells and whistles that you and I could only hope one day to have on our own vehicles. So I think there's some truth to that. Is there an underlying tone to the conversation that we're in trouble? Yeah. Am I ready to pronounce last rites and throw a handful of dirt on the coffin? Absolutely not.
No.
Which leads back to the analogy that I made at the top of the hour of that we're at a crossroads and a point of stasis at the same time. Here's what I mean by that. We're obviously at a point where we have followed the same basic formula for motorsports for 30, 40 years perhaps.
Yep.
And we've come to a fork in the road. We've come to the realization that what we've been doing no longer really fits today's model, and that we need to come to some type of decision on which fork in the road we're going to go on. The problem is we're all scared to death, and nobody really feels good about any kind of change whatsoever. So instead of being proactive, we're sitting still. And it's the classic definition of insanity, where you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome.
Do you think we're sitting still, though, Paul? Because, I look at NASCAR, and that was one of the biggest criticisms under Brian Francis. We kept changing things. And I look at IndyCar, and IndyCar has evolved for the last, 6-7 years in the chassis and now the aero packages and the motors and that type of thing, and they're looking at a whole different a 900 horsepower motor for 2020. I think do you really think we're sitting still? I think that probably applies to some forms of the sport, but I'm not sure about all of them.
Well, here's the thing. I think that the changes that we're not making with a proper thought and perspective in mind. Now, take for example, you disagreed with me on the playoff system. Let me clarify the point that I was making. The original concept of the playoffs, we're going to take the top 10 guys and they're going to race it out for the final 10 races. I was totally good with that. I thought that was a great system. Yeah, it gave some extra drama to things, and it made logical sense. Having 16 drivers and then going to 12 and then going to 8 and then going to 4, and there's bonus points for this and there's stage points and all this other stuff. What in the world are we doing? Oh my God, we have made it to the point where you have to have an engineer's degree to read the tech manual just to understand what the heck is going on. How can we expect the average individual to understand that even though this guy won the race, he's not going to advance into the next round of whatever, or this guy finished ahead of this guy, but the guy that finished behind him is actually going to move ahead? What?
Well,
isn't racing about getting to the finish line first?
I agree, and I think we've kind of made that system better and slanted it toward winning. Steve, I'm going to give you about a minute for a closing thought on this sort of chapter of the show here, and then we want to talk a World Final in very short form in the next segment.
Well, I agree with Paul. I think that there's, I will speak from one side of it, and that I agree with Paul, is that, we are just kind of sitting still, and there's not a lot of people in our sport right now that are willing to step out and take a chance and change something. And I think I speak from the short track side of the table when I say that I think there's a lot of folks on the short track side of things that are afraid to do things or afraid to take that step because, whether or not the gates open the next week ride on the decision of what they're going to do or not do. Yep. I think, and so I think that that may be part of the reason for it. I don't think that's an excuse, but I just think that some of that stagnant, some of that worry for change, Tom, may be a financial one and not a promotional one.
Yeah, I think a lot of this does start with cost. Paul, thanks, man. This has been a blast. We'll get you back on in a future show and talk some more. That's Paul Small. We're going to be right back here on Motorsports Madness right after these words.
Here's
Charlotte, and you're listening to Race Talk on the Performance Motorsports Network.
Welcome back to Race Chaser Radio's Motorsports Madness. Hey, by the way, folks, next Thursday, our 200th episode of Motorsports Madness here on the Performance Motorsports Network. Not this one, next Thursday. And we're definitely amazed and humbled by that. Thanks to all the folks in Performance Motorsports Network for making that possible. Okay, Steve-O, you're on the clock here. We got time for basically pick the winners. I want a winner from each of the races at the World Final here at Charlotte Motor Speedway this weekend. And where can our fans and listeners tune in to watch the live stream if they want to?
Well, dirtvision.com is where you're going to be able to find all the live streaming for the World Finals. So dirtvision.com is where you can find that. I'll start with the big block modifieds. They're, of course, my favorite, Tom.
Yep.
And I'm going to say Matt Shepard gets a win.
Oh.
And I'm going to say in the Saturday night portion of the program, Mike Mahaney is going to get a win in the Buzz Chew 88.
Oh, my. Okay.
On the late model side, give me Brandon Shepard for the weekend sweep. I'll take B. Shep there.
No relation
and
to
on the sprint car side, give me Logan Schuchart and give me Donnie Schatz to close out another championship.
Oh, a little shark racing action here. Okay, so that will be interesting. All right, Cisco Scaramuza, Stephen Ovens, Paul Small, and Matt Weaver along with Randy Miller. Thanks to all you guys. Thanks to all of our sponsors, My Computer Career and HMS Motorsport. That's it for us. We're out of here. Have a great week. Bless everybody, and bye-bye.
You've been listening to Motorsports Madness with the Race Chaser Online crew. Stay tuned to Performance Motorsports Network for more race talk. For the latest motorsports news, visit racechaseronline.com. Motorsports Madness is a copyrighted production of the Performance Motorsports Network, www.performancemotorsportsnetwork.com. A member of the Scorpion Radio Group Incorporated, and may not be rebroadcast, replicated, or saved in any media without the explicit written permission of PMN. Check out our Facebook page or our section of the PMN website. The opinions expressed on this program are those of the host, co-hosts, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of the management and ownership of either the Performance Motorsports Network or Scorpion Radio Group Incorporated, the advertisers, or the marketing partners. Be listening again next week when the madness returns on Monday night at 7 Eastern. Until then, keep it off the wall and keep the shiny side up.